Hi everyone, I'm Ákos, and in this video I will talk about Rancher Desktop on macOS. Rancher Desktop is an alternative to Docker Desktop with different features, of course, so if you want to use Docker extensions or the Docker development environment, you still need to install Docker Desktop. There may be other features as well that Rancher Desktop will not support. On the other hand, if you want to have a specific version of Kubernetes, then you probably want to install Rancher Desktop, and you can optionally run Docker containers as well. Remember, when you install Docker Desktop, you will have Docker containers in a virtual machine and you will have a Docker client on the host. Rancher Desktop will also install its own Docker client, so if you need to run Docker Desktop and Rancher Desktop on the same machine and you want to make sure that you always have a perfectly compatible client, you can write a simple shell script that can help you to switch between these desktops. Stay with me and I will show you how. I will search for Rancher Desktop install and click on the second link, which is the main page of Rancher Desktop. And here, if I scroll down, I will find different versions. I have a Mac OS, so I need this download Mac Apple Silicon. If you have an Intel CPU in your Mac, then you can download the other one. So if you want to install the previous version, then you can click on this installation instructions. And here the first link is the releases page on GitHub. You can click on that too. And here you can find different versions, and the latest version is 1.7.0. If I scroll down, I will find the releases here, and I want to download this DMG file for my M1 processor. Let's click on this and download. Now I can go to my Finder in the downloads folder and click on this DMG file. Okay, I have to move this to the applications folder. And now I can close this window and start Rancher Desktop. Okay, I first have to accept that it was downloaded from the internet. Open. And now we can configure some parameters of Rancher Desktop. For example, as I mentioned before, you can install any version of Kubernetes. I will leave it on the default. And if you want to use Docker with Rancher Desktop, then you need to change the container runtime. So the default is containerd, and you need to change it to dockerd. And the other configuration is changing the path variable. If you leave it automatic, then Rancher Desktop will change the path. So when you run Docker, the Docker command from the terminal, then you will run the Docker command of Rancher Desktop and not the Docker command of Docker Desktop. I don't want to change that because I want to keep the Docker command of Docker Desktop. So let's change it to manual and accept. In this window, we can configure the administrative access of Rancher Desktop. And because I don't want Rancher Desktop to change my default context, I want it to be the context of Docker Desktop. I will not allow this administrative access, so I will click on this checkbox to always run without administrative access. Okay. And now Rancher Desktop will start to configure the virtual machine and start the Kubernetes services. In the end, I can disable collecting statistics and go to diagnostics. So here I have some warnings, and this is because I have Docker Desktop and I didn't ask Rancher Desktop to configure my path. So I know that it is not a problem for me. So I will mute all of these error messages. Okay, so it's time to test our Docker context. And I will run docker context ls to see all of my context. Now my current context is Rancher desktop. If I go to default, docker context use default, and run docker ps, I will see that I don't have any running containers. I will run docker version, and if I change the context back to Rancher desktop and try the same docker ps, then I can see running containers. And let's run docker version, and here I can see that the client is still the client of Docker desktop, but the server is the server of Rancher desktop. And the question is, how can I tell that I use the client of Rancher desktop or the client of Docker desktop? So if I run which Docker, now I can see the path of the Docker client. If I run home/.rd/bin/docker version, then I will see the version of the client of Rancher desktop, which will have this suffix, this -rd. Okay, so it looks like I can use the client of Rancher desktop and see my containers running inside Rancher desktop. I could also run the client of Docker desktop and see the same result. My containers running inside Rancher desktop. And now I can try something else. Again, I will list my context. I will use default again, or I could use the desktop Linux as well. Let's try both. So docker ps, I don't have any running containers because I don't have any running containers in Docker desktop. If I change the context to be desktop Linux and try the same command, docker ps, again, I don't have any running containers. So it looks like everything works, and I can use any client with any endpoints, Rancher desktop or Docker desktop, but sometimes I want to use the client that came with the application I wanted to use, because maybe it works everything now, but sometimes it will have some bugs, and I don't want to mix those clients and the servers. So that's why I will create a script which will help me to use the client of Rancher desktop and the endpoint of Rancher desktop without mixing those clients and servers. Now let me go back to my browser because I want to show you my script, which is on GitHub, and I need to copy it, or just copy the URL and I will download it in my terminal. Curl okay. I could use it this way without any argument. I will get that I don't have permission to run it because I need to make it executable. chmod +x and container desktop shell. Okay, let's try again. And now I will get that I have to use an argument. I have to choose between Docker or Rancher. I will use Rancher. Okay, now you can see that my prompt has changed. And if I try docker ps, I will see my containers running in my Rancher desktop. I can also see my context, docker context ls, and now you can only see the default context and the context of Rancher desktop. And if I try which Docker, then you can see that this Docker client came with Rancher desktop. I can use my script from my home folder, but I want to use it from everywhere. So this is why I want to move it to another location. And since this location is not available for everyone, I need sudo, and I will use sudo mv container desktop shell, and let's move it to /usr/local/bin. And now I try to run it. It doesn't work. I need to open a new terminal, and then my terminal will recognize the new location. So I will open a new terminal here, and let's type container and tab, and it works. Let's see the source code. I have two functions here, one for Docker desktop and one for Rancher desktop. And in the end of the script, I can decide which one I want to use. So what I want to show you is that I change the path of the Docker configuration file, and I will show you my configuration file, which is in .docker config JSON, and this is my current Docker desktop configuration file. And I have only one configuration, and sometimes you want to use a different configuration file for Rancher desktop and another for Docker desktop. If you want to do that, then you can change the path of that configuration file using this docker_config variable, and this is what I use in my script. So if I activate this again, Docker, and see that Docker config variable, it is the folder of my config file. And if I exit from this context and try Rancher, I can see the other folder. Maybe you are wondering why I can see this custom prompt. This is not in my script, and I can show you how I configured this one. I need to open my ZShrc file, and in the end you can find this prompt docker host and the build prompt function. This is something I found on the internet. Unfortunately, I don't remember where I found it. If you recognize it, please let me know in the comment section and I will include it in my description. It's time to use Kubernetes, so I will run kubectl get node, and I can see my Rancher desktop virtual machine. And if it doesn't work for you, then make sure that you have the right context. You can change it here in the menu and go to Kubernetes context and choose Rancher desktop. Okay. I want to create a simple NginX container running in my Kubernetes cluster. And Rancher desktop has a feature called dashboard. And this is not just a dashboard which can manage your virtual machine. This is actually a Kubernetes dashboard. I will try to open it. If it doesn't work, then a reboot can help, and it looks like I need a reboot. Okay, I'm here again. I had to restart my macOS 2 times. One was not enough. And now I finally can go to my Rancher desktop dashboard. Okay, so I want to create a simple Nginx deployment. Let's go to workload and deployment. Here I can click on the create button and I will call it Nginx deployment. I want to call my container web, and the image is NginX, and the pool policy can be always, but I like to change it to if not present. Okay, and now I want to add some ports, so I will add this service. I want it to be a node port, and the name of the port can be HTTP. The private container port has to be 80 because this is what my NginX container uses inside. And the listening port is what I want to use from my browser. And it has to be at least 30,000, so I will use that port and click on the create button. My NginX deployment is created. Now I want to access it, so I will go to my browser and try this port. Rancher Desktop is not perfect, and we know that Docker Desktop is not perfect either. This is why it is important for you to know that you have alternatives. You also have to know that Docker Desktop is mainly for developing your application, for example, creating Docker image and learning about Docker, while Rancher Desktop is mainly for Kubernetes. Knowing that, you can choose the best for your goals and spend less time on figuring out how you can do something with an application which was not designed for what you want. If you are looking for the shell script or the code of the custom prompt, you can find it in the description.